Near-death experience. That was a really strange experience. It was almost 20 years ago. I was a student at the time, and the apartment I chose to live alone for the first time was a 1DK apartment that was almost 30 years old. I chose this apartment out of a naive idea that it would be cheap and I would be able to sleep in it, but after I started living there, I realized that I could invite friends but not a girl. Well, I didn't even have a girlfriend at that time. I remember that it was at the end of my first year of college that I unexpectedly had to leave the apartment with its old tatami mats and Fusuma sliding doors, which were very Showa style. It was because the landlord unexpectedly died suddenly. To be honest, it was not a big apartment, but I heard from someone that there was a dispute over inheritance because it was located in a good residential area not far from the station. It was later torn down and turned into a parking lot. When I was looking for an apartment, a real estate agent introduced me to a cheap property. The first floor was a warehouse of some company and an old hair salon, and the entire second floor could be used as a residence. I immediately decided to take a look at the property because it was quite spacious, located a 10-minute walk from the station, and most importantly, the rent was almost the same as before. The real estate agent was present and conducted a viewing of the property. The property, which faced a street near the station, was indeed old-looking, but not to the point of being bothersome. As we had heard in advance, there was an old beauty salon and a company warehouse on the first floor, and the second floor was accessed by an external staircase. At the top of the stairs, there is another stairway to the rooftop, and just before that is the front door. When you open the front door, there is another door on the inside, and between the two doors is a bathroom. I opened the inner door with a bit of excitement. I was overwhelmed by the huge, empty space. The entire second floor was nothing but a wide open space. "How do you like it? Isn't it spacious?" To that comment from the real estate agent I said, "No, you can't have this if you live alone." It was not only the size of the room that made me feel strange, but also the fact that there was no partition between the rooms. The floor was a purple carpet. It is not difficult to imagine that this is the color of the clothes worn by a priest of a certain religion. I was told that the floor had been used as a dojo by a certain religious group in the past, and that is why it looked like this. The group that had rented it was not the same religious group that caused the big incident. The landlord will be responsible for the remodeling, so please don't worry. The real estate agent casually mentioned remodeling, but I couldn't help but have certain doubts when he talked about partitioning the room and even installing a room and a bath. "Is this an accidental property?" The real estate agent answered without changing color. "There is no such fact," he said. "However, the property itself is old and has been rented by a religious organization, so it has not been rented for a long time. So the landlord is willing to help us if there is someone who will live there, so we can rent it out under these conditions." Normally, he would have hesitated, but he decided immediately because he needed to get rid of his old apartment as soon as possible. This would later lead to that experience. A month later, after completing a simple renovation, the apartment was just right. The huge space had been divided into two spaces by a wall in the middle. It was too large to be called a room, but it was still much better than before. However, the purple carpet was still there, and that bothered me. But I was somewhat buoyed by the size of the room, which was more than I could hold by myself. It was fun to imagine what kind of furniture I could put in the room, but above all, it was built almost like a house. The beauty salon closes in the evening, so no one would complain if I played guitar or played video games all night long. I was excited to begin such a free and carefree life. However, something unusual happened as soon as they moved in. In the middle of the night, the sound of rapping echoed in the room. At first, he thought it was just the old building making the house ring. However, instead of the mishmash sound of a house ringing, there was a distinct sound of someone clapping their hands, echoing from all over the room. It was not just once or twice a night. I thought I would be bothered by such a phenomenon, but apparently I was not of such a nervous disposition. I found myself falling asleep without regard to such things. One day, a friend of mine decided to come over for a visit. We had a party until midnight with the friend who came to celebrate his housewarming, so the friend missed the last train and had to stay over. I told my friend that there was a rapping sound, but he did not believe me because he was skeptical about psychic phenomena. However, when he actually turned off the light, the rapping sound started as usual, and his friend was very surprised to hear it. One night late at night, I left my friend, who came to visit me frequently after that, alone and went to the nearest convenience store to buy some groceries. When I came back, my friend looked very frightened and raised her voice. I just heard a banging sound from inside the cardboard box that had been used as a TV stand. According to my friend, he was using a piece of cardboard from the purchase of a CRT TV that had been placed in a room he had just moved into as a TV rack, when suddenly someone tapped hard on the inside of the cardboard. Hearing this, my friend and I looked inside with trepidation, but of course, not a single person was there. My friend seemed quite surprised and suggested that we move out of the room, but I brushed off the suggestion as no harm had come to me. However, after that day, the bizarre phenomena began to gain momentum. The rapping sound became more intense, the TV was on when it was supposed to be off, someone's voice was heard even though no one was supposed to be there, and things that were supposed to be left behind were missing. The voices were indeed eerie, but I didn't mind them so much as they were an extension of the rapping sound, since I heard them say, "Hey," or at most, a word or two. I was troubled by the loss of things, but I can't say anything about that because my management was not so good. Then one day, about a week after the cardboard incident, I had a strange dream. In the dream, I was standing in what looked like a dry field with nothing around me. A straight gravel road stretched out in front of me and went on forever. After walking for a while, I saw an old one-story house ahead on my right. A man with a shaved head in his 60s or 70s was standing at the entrance of the house, which looked like a shack with a red tin roof surrounded by a crumbling block wall. The man was about to enter the house with his hand on the front door. I watched him from a short distance away. Then the man shifted his gaze to me and said, "I'll be back next Friday." I thought I heard him say next time, but I am not sure what he actually said. But that one word woke me up. My heart was racing as if I had had a nightmare, and large beads of sweat were pouring from my forehead. I had a spooky dream. As I was feeling an indescribable aftertaste, I suddenly felt the presence of someone under my pillow. At the time, Chinese thieves were causing a stir in the world, and I was terrified that they had entered such a ramshackle house. The presence stood by my bedside, motionless. I thought it would be better to pretend to be asleep and let it pass by without provoking it, so I kept my breath still, and the eerie presence passed by my left side and went toward the door at my feet. I think back calmly on this moment, not a footstep was heard. Oh, they didn't find out. I was so relieved, but the presence stopped at my feet and made no move. Had I been caught pretending to be asleep? Driven by anxiety, I opened my eyes and tried to see what the presence was, but at that moment I was unable to move. A strong force crushed my body from both ends, and I could not move, and a sound like a mechanical noise echoed in my head. I was so terrified that I could not utter a single sound, and I was chanting appropriate sutras in my mind and asking for help from someone. "Hey, are you there?" I heard my friend's voice. As soon as I heard the voice, my body, which had stopped moving, began to move. I rushed to the front door and opened it with all my might. There stood my friend, in a state of complete drunkenness. I said, "Thanks for coming at this time of night. I've come to return a game I borrowed." He was cleaning out his room and found a game he had borrowed a long time ago, so he took the train all the way here to return it before he forgot it again. He was going to head straight to my house, but he lost track of time when he went to a girl's bar in front of the station to have a quick drink. It is a ridiculous story, but thanks to my friend, I was saved from the fear of being in a bind. Since then, I have been experiencing the same phenomenon almost every day. Day and night. As I was attacked day after day after day, I began to recognize the moment when it occurred. I wondered why it was happening so often, and then I began to suffer from unexplained vertigo. One night, I was lying on the futon when my front started to spin around. I am sure many of you have had the experience of spinning around with a watermelon splitter using a baseball bat as a prop. That spinning of the eyes continued for a long time. At first I thought it would go away after a night of standing up, but it lasted for several days. The symptoms would get worse and lighter, but basically the rolling eyes would continue for a long time. I thought it might be a brain disease, so I went to a large hospital for a thorough examination, but the cause was diagnosed as unknown. After a few months of being attacked by these strange phenomena, I was always told, "I'm not sure what's wrong with me. Perhaps they are trying to kick me out of the house?" Indeed, when I think about it, that may be the case. It could be that the bizarre phenomena, which could be described as repeated harassment, was an attempt to get rid of me. But there is a reason why I stayed here. Although my parents repeatedly told me not to live in such a dangerous house, the main reason was that moving was a hassle. I think I was also somewhat stubborn. I continued to live my life with a high expectation that they would give up sooner or later. Finally, I arrived at that experience. With the actual experience I am about to share with you, the major bizarre phenomenon comes to an end. However, looking back on it now, I am not sure if it was real or if it was a dream. I hope you will take this into consideration as you continue reading. I was taking a nap. I was having a dream sequence in which that shaved-headed man I saw one day appeared. The man who had been staring at me like he was staring at me was going into the house without saying a word. I just stared at him. That's when the man told me what he said in the previous dream. "I'll be back on Friday." The word "I don't know" suddenly came to mind. I don't remember being told such a thing. I had no recollection of even seeing that shaved head in the first place. As I walked on with these thoughts in my mind, I found myself right next to a house. The house up close was even shabbier. The paint was peeling off the roof, the sliding door was leaning, and the windows were broken. I felt strangely sorry for the man who lived in such an abandoned place. As I was about to walk past the house, someone caught me by the arm. When I turned around, that man was holding my arm in a terrible manner. I clearly remember that his face was filled with hatred and anger, as if he was out of this world. Then I jumped out of bed. My heart was beating just as hard as before. My breathing was ragged, and when I took a deep breath to catch my breath, I realized something. Was it an instinctive sense? My heart stops. It is still a mystery to me, but for some reason I suddenly understood that. I took a deep breath and pounded my chest hard. Again and again, and again, and again, and again, I pounded hard. But without any success, I gradually began to feel suffocated. I could not breathe well. I felt my heartbeat became smaller and weaker as I breathed in and out. Oh, God, I'm dead. I'm dying. I still remember the sensation of my last small pulsing heartbeat. When I regained consciousness, I was standing halfway up a thin, foggy stone staircase. Looking around at the unpopular area, I saw a deserted hot spring resort at the top and an endless series of stairs at the bottom. Unsure of which way to go, I noticed a side street right next to it. I was curious about a side road and continued onward, and came to a mountain road, or rather a forest road, with an endless pine forest. The scenery was sepia-toned, with no color at all. We walked aimlessly through a landscape that looked like a black and white photograph. We were not sure where the road would lead to, so we simply continued straight ahead. Suddenly, I noticed a large lake in the pine trees on my right. The sky was covered with thick clouds, but through the gaps in the clouds, Several pillars of light were standing on the surface of the water. The sight was so divine and beautiful that it captured my eyes and heart. I must see that scene up close and personal. Driven by this impulse, I quicken my pace. As I continue on, with a view of the scene through the trees, I come to a fork in the road. To my right, a path leads toward the lake. Also, at the junction, there was a one-sheet signboard that was taller than it should have been, which read Lake Ashia is this way in red handwritten letters. I remember that only the letters were bright red, despite the sepia color of the surroundings. As an additional note, there is a lake called Lake Ashi in Hakone, Kanagawa Prefecture. However, there is no lake called Lake Ashia. Nor am I a resident of Kanagawa Prefecture. I am not a resident of Kanagawa Prefecture, so please understand that I have never been to Hakone. I turned at the fork and walked on, hoping to reach the shore of the lake as soon as possible, even if it was only for a minute or a second. After walking for a while, I saw a store. To the left of the store, which was built in the style of a Showa-era candy store, was a sign similar to the one at the previous junction. The entrance to the store was a sliding glass door that offered a panoramic view of the store. The store was not popular inside. Beyond the sliding glass door was a large earthen floor, with a Japanese-style room in front of it and a room with a Narian curtain hanging on the right side. There is a kitchen door at the far left, and beyond the door, which is still open, is a road. I could see the lake along the path. I opened the door to the store, unable to suppress my feelings. "I'm sorry." I opened the sliding door and called out to the owner of the store. But there was no answer. I stepped out and entered the store. I continued to look around, but as usual, I could not see anyone in the store. "Please excuse me." I raise my voice louder than before, but there is no response. I want to head to the lake as soon as possible, but I'm in trouble. Thinking this, I wait for the owner to come out. A set of futons was carefully folded in the Japanese-style room, indicating that the house was not vacant. If this is the case, is the owner just leaving the store empty for a while? With this thought in mind, I waited patiently for the owner to return, but I didn't hear from him. But no matter how long I waited, there was no sign of anyone coming out. I'm sorry for not asking, but let's move on. I looked at the kitchen door, made up my mind, and was about to head for the door to the Japanese-style room. "Can I help you?" When did she appear? A bent-over old woman with her hands folded behind her back was standing in front of the curtain, glaring at us. I'd like to go to the lake up ahead." I was momentarily perplexed, but I told her that I wanted to continue on. The old woman took a breath and opened her mouth again. "You can't go any further." For a moment, I didn't understand the meaning of the words and thought, I can't go on unless I pay. I fumbled in my jeans pockets, but to my dismay, I could not find my wallet. The old woman watched my panic and did not say a word. I heard multiple voices behind me. I turned around to see three women in their 50s and 60s talking congenially and heading this way. "Welcome," the old woman greeted the trio with a different attitude from mine. After a short conversation, she let them pass easily into the restaurant, and they went through the Japanese-style room, out the kitchen door, and down the street. I stood there, stunned at the scene. As I stood there, an old woman who had seen them off came up to me and called out, "What is this difference between the three of you? Are you sure you want to go down this road? You can go, but if you go, you can't come back, can you?" "What do you mean by that?" The old woman did not answer. But unlike before, the old woman had a kind, Buddha-like expression on her face. When I saw that, I realized everything. I should not go on. I bowed silently and left the place. I looked back and saw an old woman staring at me. Then I woke up from the dream. Upon regaining consciousness, the first thing I checked was my heartbeat. Placing my hand on my chest, I could see that it was pulsing solidly. Drenched in sweat, That heartbeat made me feel alive. That is when I finally felt relief. For a while after that, the rapping noises and the kinbaku continued, but after 6 months of moving in, the strange phenomena gradually subsided and eventually disappeared. I had been staying in that room for about 10 years, but I think it was during the first 6 months after I moved in that I experienced the strange phenomena. The building has now been torn down and replaced with a new one. Although I have moved away from that place, I sometimes drop by for personal business, and every time I see the newly reconstructed building, I am reminded of that incident. As I mentioned at the beginning of this article, I do not know if this near-death experience was real or a dream. It gives me a little chill down my spine to think that if I had proceeded beyond the storefront at that time, perhaps I would not really be in this world. Long story short, this is my real experience. And finally, I would like to share a story about the handover of a room in the presence of a contractor. One of the contractors approached me while inspecting various parts of the room and asked, "What is the inspection opening in the ceiling?" He asked me, "Have you done anything to the ceiling?" He asked me. When I told him I didn't know anything, he climbed up on a stepladder and took a few pictures with his digital camera. He showed them to me. Inside was what looked like a small altar. Inside was a small altar with an old Japanese doll facing me. I let out a little scream, but now that I think back on it, I can't help but think that it had something to do with a series of bizarre phenomena. Such is the story. This concludes this story. Thank you for listening to the end.